Cosmic Frequency, Tuning into the Awakened Heart. This program is brought to you by Pranaluz Conscious Living. My name is Ana Lu and I am the founder of Pranaluz and host for the Cosmic Frequency podcasts. Our podcasts focus on three main pillars: spirituality and social and environmental awareness. Our topic today is Jyotish, Vedic Astrology, and our guest is DC Leiro. DC Christian Leiro is originally from Norway and has spent most of his life abroad, mostly in Asia and Bali. He started studying Vedic texts as a young teenager in Norway. Driven by a deepest thirst for Indian philosophy and yoga, he moved to the United States in his early 20s to study Ayurveda with Dr. Vasant Lad at the Ayurvedic Institute. It was there he met Hart de Fouw, who later became his Jyotish teacher for over a decade. The last 4 years, DC has been a student under Pandit Sanjat Rath from a traditional family lineage of astrologers from Puri, Orissa. DC Leiro bridges his Western upbringing and the doctrine of Indian philosophy to offer a unique approach to deliver chart readings with his inspections.
Hello, Shivananda. It's a pleasure to have this conversation with you today. How are you?
I'm very good. How are you?
Very well, thank you. Super excited to talk to you today about Jyotish. So thank you so much again for being here. I would love to perhaps begin with a little bit of what it is for the listeners who are not so familiarized with this topic, and perhaps also how did you come across his teachings in your personal spiritual path?
Thank you. Jyotisha, or how it's more pronounced in modern India, Jyotish. It's a big, vast subject. I think the easiest way to give a quick translation is to call it Vedic Astrology. And many people now have heard about Veda or Vedic, and they understand it's some kind of knowledge that comes from India. So Vedic Astrology is maybe a modern translation. I think it started maybe in the 70s when some Indian astrologers came over to America and they were introducing Jyotisha. And while Jyotish is much more than just astrology, it is what's used most of the time. But Jyotisha in and of itself is actually a very old science that belongs to the Vedas. It's one of the limbs. It's one of the things one needs to understand in order to follow the Vedas, the ancient teachings from India. And astronomy is part of it, and it's not seen as anything different. It's the same science of studying astronomy and astrology. It's not two different things like we see in the West. There's a big difference between what they call astronomy as pure, objective, NASA certified. Most of those people are into that. They don't believe maybe in astrology. And I will even say some of the Western astrologers might not actually know so much about astronomy. So Jyotisha is a subject that deals with light. In fact, the very term Jyotisha is Jyotir means light, and Isha can be seen as a lord or a ruler. So the lords of light, or maybe more modern way of saying it, the science, the study of light. And that extends from study of astronomy, study the stars, study the planets, study the constellations, and also study the inner light that we carry, that we have, light that's on the inside. So it's a study from the most, we could say, objective astronomy, science, into the most subjective intuition and internal, even dreams, because isn't that a form of light that we have on the inner reality? But to make it simple, Vedic astrology, Indian astrology, sometimes called even Hindu astrology, So Indian astrology, Vedic astrology is what we can say is the most commonly used form of Jyotisha, is the astrology of India.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah. So my journey into it is a long journey. I think I started, I guess, even before teenage years. I was, regular kid into skateboarding and this stuff, and very, very much influenced by American skateboarding culture and the music, the punk rock scene, and later on the straight edge punk rock was part of what I used to listen to. Like started off maybe with, the bit of the rebel skateboarding punk rock was against society, and later on from the lyrics, I was hearing that like the straight edge music, still very like hardcore punk rock scene, but very positive, very life affirming lyrics and music that had a message, that had some meaning behind it. And carrying on with that, I later found what's called Krishna core. Krishna core is a genre of hardcore music that was specific to people who got into Hinduism, and we probably heard about the Hare Krishnas, the ISKCON movement all around the world. So there were these skateboarders, these punk rock kids who got into the mystical side of Hindu, Indian, spiritual, and they started to develop music that even had mantras. So when I first heard that, I was like, wow, this is different, this is strange. And then for me, the music was about the meaning. It was about the message that was carried in those songs. And I never heard such teachings, actually. They would speak about big stuff, about life and about the universe, and they would actually bring in even the chants into the music. So that got me started, and later on, of course, like many people, I would run into these Hare Krishnas. They were, downtown, they were chanting, and I would be like, wow, those are those people, and I would get interested. I would read their material and followed into becoming a vegetarian. I would hang out at their restaurants, and later on I would go for their Bhagavad Gita classes on Sundays. And this was, was a young teenager. It was early 90s and middle 90s.
And this was in Norway, because you're originally from there, right?
Yeah, I grew up in Norway.
Wow.
So it was not, back in the 90s, early 90s, there was really not much available, but the Hare Krishnas, they had gatherings, and I got deeper involved. And there was another tradition called Ananda Marg, and they were actually also back in Norway, but maybe not as famous, or they had a small little center where they would teach yoga, and I got initiated into very old, with mantra, with yantra, with tantra. They had actually very profound yoga teacher trainings, very classical, and I would spend time between those two. I never really, I wouldn't say I joined and became a Hare Krishna or Ananda Marga, but I was very interested in the knowledge, and that was my initial point into yoga, Ayurveda, and mantras and these teachings. And I kind of exhausted. There was not much in Norway, so I exhausted the possibilities. There was, back in the day, there was no yoga studio. There was nothing like that. I imported books on Ayurveda, and then I found that there was a center in America. So I was starting to travel, and first in, I think it was 97 was the first time to the States, and that opened up many doors. But then in 99 is when I really moved to the States to study with Dr. Vasant Lad in Albuquerque, New Mexico at the Ayurvedic Institute. And that was a profound change in my life. That was what opened the doors to so many other schools and other teachers. And that's where I found Vedic astrology, Jyotish. I was back in 99. And later on, Dr. Hart de Fouw, he was coming there to give readings and lectures. And later on, I think it was maybe 2001, 2002, then I started to study more formally with him for over a decade. For the last, I guess, 4 or 5 years now, I've been more involved with Pandit Sanjat Rath, who comes from a very traditional Indian astrology family. So it's been a long journey.
Yes, and that's why I wanted to interview you, because I took one of your workshops in Ubud, and I know you're super passionate about philosophy, and you go really deep into the topics. And of course, one can tell just by having a small conversation with you that you have studied so much and that you've been so deep into these teachings. That's why it's fascinating to have this conversation with you. So thank you for sharing.
My pleasure. This is my pleasure to share. It is still a passion, and it's a never-ending study for me.
Thank you. And perhaps, some of us that are involved in the yoga field or the mantra chanting, maybe so a bit more familiarized with the Vedas, right? But perhaps it'll be nice if you could just give us a little background, because you mentioned that these teachings are also one of the parts, or that come from the Vedas as well, that are incorporated somehow there. So there is a relationship, right, that they used to have by then to astrology. So maybe can you tell a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I think you're right that more and more people are getting familiar with like the term Veda, and especially in the West, the openings into first the yoga, and then now I think Ayurveda has become very popular. So Ayurveda has that term in it, right? It's Ayu and Veda, and together they become Ayurveda. Ayu means life, and Veda is knowledge. But the Vedas are even more profound. They are considered to be the oldest living, still chanted, still breathing, still used texts or knowledge that we have. There are some indications of Babylonian or Egyptian texts that they say might be older than the Vedas, but the Vedas are still in use. They're still living, even though Sanskrit, and there's different forms of Sanskrit, but these chants, they're still practiced, and different families in India are holding this sacred knowledge together. So Veda is the wisdom, we could say. In European languages, there are many similar words like vetenskap, which means science, and this veten or vid means knowledge. So Veda is wisdom and knowledge. And Hart de Fouw, my first teacher in astrology, he used to say, what a culture knows, it will name. And it's interesting how we are importing these terms. Even guru is something that I think you can find in an English dictionary now. What does guru mean? Well, it's a Sanskrit term, someone with profound knowledge, right? So Veda, guru, and these terms, yoga, Ayurveda, are very specific technical terms that comes from a culture that valued knowledge. And most of this is hard to trace the true origin, because they say it is ancient, as before time, or that the Vedas are not even their eternal knowledge. And it's something that the rishis heard, that they didn't create it, but these rishis, the sages, the seers, they were opening up to this wisdom that's eternal, and the Vedas are flowing through them. So who knows exactly, but there are definitely historical records that will point back to what could say 3,000, maybe 5,000 years ago, that this knowledge was existing. Oral tradition will say that it's been passed down since eternal, but there are indications of what should we say, texts or artifacts that point to a culture that is extremely old, thousands of years ago, and this old culture had very deep, profound knowledge and specific terms, for different parts of reality, different parts of nature, including different parts of human nature, internal aspects, deep psychology, we could call it, deep insights into the human condition. And definitely insights into nature, and that includes the astrology part. So there were, astrological sequences, combinations, patterns that are described, that when we use modern day astronomy and we trace back these events that they refer back to, would have happened many thousands of years ago. Foundation of what we can see as more like the modern Hindu, they will refer back to the Vedas as the cornerstone. So the modern yoga scenes, the modern philosophy, the chants that you hear in yoga classes, they have their foundation into this tradition of the Vedas, which is at least 2, 3, maybe 4 or 5,000 years old.
Yes, and not to say also like a lot of the religions also derive right from the Vedas.
Mm-hmm.
Like exactly.
Yeah.
Thank you, Shivananda. I have personally done my chart a couple of times, long time ago, and then I also did it with you last year, right?
Yep.
So that was a really great reading, by the way. But so what would be the main difference? A lot of people ask this question. So what is the difference between Vedic astrology and the Western astrology that we are more used to in this side of the world?
Yeah, there is a technical difference that many people don't even know, actually. When they have grown up in Western society, they might have, seen in books or magazines or I guess online these days about the sun sign, and they read about maybe the sun is in let's say Leo, and most people have some idea about this idea of the zodiac, the star signs that we see in horoscopes, and they talk about sun is in Aries, sun is in Taurus, right? In Western, it's not the same as what you see in the sky. So when we go out at night and we look up at the night sky, we see stars. And maybe some people know certain constellations like the Big Dipper, or if you're in the southern hemisphere, the Southern Cross. And maybe even some people know a little bit about, astronomy, and they see the different constellations. Now, they are actually not the same as the star signs. Even though we use the same language, the same names, there is a difference between Western and Eastern astrology that is quite strange when people start to look into using Vedic astrology. 80% of the time they get a different sign, a different constellation. So there's two different zodiacs. One is called tropical, one is sidereal, and one is following the true stars. That's what we call constellation, right? So means with, and stellar. Constellation means with stars. And Western use what's called a tropical zodiac, which is based upon the seasons. So they say that every time there is a equinox and going into the spring equinox, that is when the zodiac starts. So it's not based upon, it's based upon time, it's not based upon the stars, whereas most of Eastern astrology, including, like we could say, Taoist astrology and the Chinese and different forms, they use what's called sidereal, or the constellation. So we could, to make it simple, we could say they use the space, they use the true placements of what you see in the sky, whereas Western use time. Now, I don't criticize Western. It's not less. A lot of it depends upon who's reading it, right? So there's two different systems. And I compare it to maybe how you might have seen Indian doctors. They take the pulse, as Ayurvedic doctors, they take the pulse, and they have a system where they work with 5 elements. Now, the Chinese doctor that uses, acupuncture, and they also have a system where they have 5 elements, and they will take the pulse, they will diagnose the person, they will say different elements might be high and low, and different things are in balance. It's a different system, 5 different elements. Some are the same, like they have fire, they have wind, but in Indian, they have some elements that are not found in Chinese. It's the same thing with Western astrology. It does work when a person has gone deep into it, they can use it, but it is, in my view, it's a little bit strange. It's when I see up in the night sky and I see, let's say, Jupiter in Capricorn. I can see the constellation of Capricorn, and I can see clearly with my naked eye, there's Jupiter, and the stars behind there is Capricorn. And then I go online and I see in Western, they're saying Jupiter is in Aquarius, and it doesn't make sense to me. So that's just my personal take. I like to, what I see is what I get. And I will also say that I think that the perspective of using that level of the true stars is what we call svarga. So there's 3 levels, and in Western they use 2 levels. They use the earth, the sun, and the seasons, but they don't extend up into the sky of constellations. So from my point of view, I consider it to be a higher understanding. Having said that, there are amazing Western astrologers who do great things. I don't want to sound like I'm biased. I just have my personal flavor, which is nature. And when I see something and I see Jupiter in Capricorn, the constellation of Capricorn, then I know it's there. So that's my personal take on it.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for sharing that, because I think it's nice to give a different perspective, as many people also ask this question, what is the difference?
I want to say one more thing, that a big difference is the cultural knowledge that comes behind. So the understanding of life, the understanding of karma. Again, it's a term that is Sanskrit and we use it in English, karma. That knowledge is so deep and it goes together with the study of Vedic astrology. Jyotish belongs to the Vedic tradition, and an understanding of spirituality and the understanding of the functions of nature, and therefore the idea of a chart being a personal map of the karma. And with Jyotish, it comes with the ability to give certain remedies, and I think that's very unique in Eastern, we could say, culture, that there are ways of working with one's deepest karma, whereas I think in Western it becomes a bit limited and more about psychology. It's not so much about the ability to actually engage with life, the matrix of life, and work on what I consider to be deeper than psychology. So the foundation of Vedas and the spirituality and the understanding of the natural law and order, I think, is not seen as clean and clearly in the Western tradition.
Yes, I totally agree, because I've had both readings, and I found spiritual like deeper, just like you mentioned about the karma, about like my mission, my purpose, like so much deeper in way other levels like than regular astrology or Western astrology does. So you mentioned it is like a personal map of the karma, right? And how did the old ancient tradition used the astrology? Did they do it for like regular people? Was it only like limited to certain castes? Or can you speak a bit more about the background of how the tradition used it, and maybe perhaps also how it's used nowadays?
Yeah. So as a limb of the Veda, Jyotisha is considered to be the tool for timekeeping. And why was that important? Well, the goal, as far as I understand, is to align to nature. And nature is what we're in, and nature is time and space. So in the old days, it was used for calendar and for marking and aligning to certain events, where nature, with a placement of these bodies in the sky, would open up certain frequencies, certain energies. Things like new moon and full moon. Those are big markings in space, and naturally people would have understanding of the flow of the moon, and therefore maybe certain rituals, certain ceremonies, certain methods of aligning to a full and a new moon. I think it's a human nature that we do every year. We make New Year's resolutions. But one of my teachers used to say that, unfortunately, the Gregorian calendar is not really aligned to nature. So sometimes it's harder to catch the wave of a new year when we're just following a calendar that is not true to the full cycles.
Or cycles, yeah.
So like a solar and lunar calendar, like Chinese calendar, they start the new year slightly different, right? And that's said to be more closely connected to nature. So the origin was to align to nature, and specifically for communities, for the society, to use these markings of certain holidays, to do the rituals, to make sure that they are participating in life. Later on, it becomes the called Jataka, the personal chart. That can also be done. So that was maybe in the old days used a bit more for the royalty, for the leaders, to help the leaders to align, and therefore the leaders could, align and protect in the culture or protect the society. The regular people, I don't think, had access so much as we have in this day and age to that everyone can go online and they can get, the computation, the calculation of a chart is actually a mathematical skill that some of the grandfathers of some of my teachers, they would do this in their heads. They had such a deep, mathematical background that they could calculate astronomy in their head, that they could sit there and make the chart. I've seen this done in India. There are some old astrologers, they don't use computers, and it might take them a few hours. In fact, one astrologer, he said, okay, come back in 2 days. And he's going through all the calculations by hand. And I show up and he's done what my computer can do in, 10 seconds. He's done that by hand for hours and hours. So it's a skill that is the second. There's the first one is observations. That's pure astronomy. Then there's calculation. The third level of Jyotisha is what we call the personal chart. And that is what comes down in this day and age. We are all interested in our personal karma. So Vedic astrology in this day and age is, especially in the West, it's more about the personal chart. But in India, they still follow a solar lunar calendar called Panchanga, and all the rituals and marriage dates and all kinds of holy days. Here in Bali too, there are certain days when you can see the whole village is coming together, and it's the moon is aligning. It's a celebration. It's a ritual. It's a prayer. And then there are other days when you're not allowed to do things like going out. Once a year in Bali, there is a day where the whole island shuts down. It's a specific day for a new year. And in India too, these old calendars that are, in my view, a bit more intelligent than the modern Gregorian calendar. They are following natural cycles of the sun and moon. The origin of the Gregorian calendar, I believe they did their best. We can see that there is a cycle of the year that starts somewhat with the new year. But have you ever thought about September, October, November, December? What they actually mean? If you speak Spanish or French, then September, October, November, December, it sounds very similar to the numbers of 7, 8, 9, 10, right? Yeah, the decimal system. So December and Deci as in 10, it used to be a calendar with 10 months. They missed a little bit of nature. They missed 2 months, and it was only later that it was corrected. And then we had the emperors of Julius and August that came in, and we have now 12 months. And why do we have that? Well, the average, every 2.7 years, there's a difference, but on an average, there is 12 lunar cycles. So 12 months in a year, and we have 12 months. But there are other times when we get an extra month. So nature is different than our modern calendar, but there are older calendars that were in place thousands of years ago, and they're still being used in old cultures like Indian culture. Jyotisha is still used for timekeeping in India and planning certain events, when to start a new business, when to get married, when to move into a new home. All these things can be done in alignment with greater nature. For most Westerners, it's about how to align themselves with greater nature by using a birth chart.
Thank you for clarifying that. I think it definitely changes a lot of people's perspectives, like how we can connect deeper with the cycles of nature, which, as you mentioned, a lot of our ancient cultures had it. I personally have the opportunity to study at some point in my life with the Mayan culture, and I learned how to do their horoscopes, and they had a similar concept, in relationship with the cycles and nature, and very deep spiritual. It was really, really much deeper than, just knowing about your life or skills. It was more about the purpose and the mission on a spiritual, mental, and physical level, which is also very interesting that, a lot of our cultures did have this knowledge, and we somehow lost it, but we're still regaining it back, right? Connecting more with that essence.
I completely agree. The knowledge of ancient cultures, it's sometimes strange for modern people who grew up in societies where we believe we are so advanced. But then when I look into old text, and definitely the mind, the levels of astronomy that they had, the ability to calculate astrological cycles and movements of planets that in some Western astronomy, apparently it was 1930s, 40s, and 50s that they started to get this down. But we're talking about thousands of years ago. They had methods of astronomy that was deep knowledge, and the way that they saw it was not just physical. It was that we are indeed in relation. We are in connection to something greater, and the integration with society and culture is very different than the individual psychological based Western. So Western astrology, even though it has opening to spirituality, I truly believe that it focuses maybe a bit too much on the individual psychology, and whereas Eastern culture, old culture, didn't really know or care too much about that. It was like here in Bali too, it's not so much about self-realization and development. It's not so much about individual accomplishment. It's about being part of society, being part of the family, finding one's place. And in this culture, if a business is failing, if the marriage is having problems, if health is going down, well, they might contact a doctor or a counseling, but more likely they go for the rituals, they go for the ceremonies, they go to work with nature. And that is something that is very deep in Vedic astrology, is that, yes, we can go to a certain extent of developing ourselves, but eventually we are part of nature. And to put it into, again, to the context of the Vedas, the understanding of aligning to greater is on three levels, like you beautifully opened up with the ability to connect to oneself is important, but then with nature and also with the community. These are teachings that I think have been lost in modern Western world, and astrology, unfortunately, in the Western is maybe a bit too individualized because it doesn't have the culture that comes with the Vedic of, again, it's positioning oneself, aligning oneself with greater, finding that one has the individual karma and accepting that within the community, within the country, within the this world is shared by all of us. And in my view, if everyone woke up in the morning and we recognize that, wow, there's this sun, it doesn't have to be airy-fairy astrology. It can be as simple as astronomy. Here is this beautiful solar body that comes up. It's a star that gives us life. And if we remember that we all share that life force and we all align to that, I think we can start to see the world in a different light, that we all are dependent upon that source of the sun. I think old ancient cultures had a bit more connection to nature than most of the time. Now we wake up and we look at the smartphone and we look at our calendar and we look at the things we have to do, and we forget our place in nature.
Yes, very beautifully said. Thank you for that. I completely agree. And I was just going to mention that on a chart, you can for sure learn way more about yourself and how to align with those elements, how to help us through the understanding of our personal karma, perhaps our collective karma, help us remember, align, and connect deeper with that natural order on a daily basis, which gives us so much more tools to go through life, right? In a deeper level, right?
Yeah.
Thank you. And speaking just specifically about the charts, like how do you calculate them, or how does this map allows us to work deeper? Like, tell us a little bit more of. Not going to give us a class, but just on a general basis, how do you do it, and how can you work deeper with the information that the chart offers to us?
Mm-hmm. I think for us Westerners, the self-understanding is a big part of our journey, and to find that a chart that was in place from birth is already setting up things like family dynamic, ancestral karma. That was one of my profound thing I had with my first reading with the person who became my first teacher. He spoke about things that happened to my mother before I was born from my chart, that things that I didn't know about, that later on I checked in with her and she confirmed these things. So it puts the mind into a bit more of an open space, I think, to see that we are embodied in a unique time and space. And there is a science of astrology that can both describe what has happened, and a lot of times when I see a client, the first part of the reading is to go through their journey, to go through the roads that they've been traveling upon, and seeing that there are different seasons. And I call it an art and a science, and I have to be honest, I never met any astrologer who can do 100%. There is room for the unknown, so to speak. And I think any true astrologer will say that there is parts of the chart that we don't see. But if we can get to a place where we start to predict or confirm certain cycles, and a client is starting to see that someone else can see their history, it creates a narrative. It creates a story that actually puts it maybe a bit of a distance, that they don't have to be so identified with it, and it creates more of a freedom to see that it was not one's mistake, it was not one's fault, that these things were, we could say, destined to happen. And it gives a type of freedom to lift oneself out of that old story. So that, I think, is quite an empowering, open mind experience. I know it was for me the first time. I'm actually a skeptical person. I like to test things. I don't believe it at the first sight, but when several astrologers start to point towards the same thing, and they are talking about things that there was no way they could have known about me, and like I said, even before I was born, these things created an openness in me that, wow, there is something bigger going on here. So just by that, it starts to open the mind. Now, further on, it definitely is a tool for finding one's blind spot. So again, from modern Western, we do a lot of introspection, we look at ourselves, but there is something in our eye. There is an optical nerve ending that creates a blind spot in our physical eye. So we extend that understanding to the psyche. There are things of us we don't fully understand, that we don't fully see. It might be something we learn over time. If our friends are always saying the same stuff about us, it might be something we need to listen to. But astrology gives us that ability to look deeper into our filters, our way of acting and seeing the world. We all have different personalities, we all have different perspective, and to start to see why it is we see that world in that way. And that when I study charts and I see, okay, here's a person who sees the world through a completely different filter. It gives us insight to ourselves, but also that everyone else has their own chart. They have their own world almost. They're looking through a lens and they see the world through that lens. And it's almost, creating reality because they have a filter that is in place. And indeed, the self-understanding, it helps to open up those filters, and we can clean and clear our view, ideally to find higher expressions of it. Now, when it comes to more of the mystical side, then that old world, they will talk about curses. They will talk about, gifts and curses, that there are places in our lives where things are open and things are flowing, and other people might look at us and they see our talents and they see much that we have good luck in certain aspects of life. And then there might be other parts of life where things are more contracted and it seems like we're just spinning, we're not really getting the momentum. Lady luck, what is our good karma, and seeing that there are places where things are just open, and then there are places where things are closed.
And also that allows us the areas, like you said, that gives us like a point where we can start working on that through the remedies and the offerings and the rituals and the mantras and everything that
exactly. I've seen some kids in India, some teenage kids who must have, done this before, because they know deeper and deeper levels that I'm still learning into my 40s. I know this 14-year-old kid in India who he's grown up in a family, of course, but even though his family is providing material, they never forced him. But for some reason, he is a child prodigy. And we see that with other kids too, have naturally talents. They are, 3 or 4-year-old, they're picking up some kind of instrument or a paintbrush. And it's almost like from a past life, they have an ability. Now, that is karma. And when we start to get older into the world, we see there might be parts of our life, especially relationship can be, how is it that we end up with the same person, or how is it that we end up making the same mistakes? And that is where Vedic astrology offers quite unique methods. One of the strangest, but I will say most profound remedy that can be done for relationship karma is fasting. And how does that work? It makes no sense in the modern Western world of someone who has a difficult time in a relationship. They can fast once a week. There's specific days for fasting for each person. And by fasting, they start to work on their karma. So this is where, on the psychological level, Western medicine level, it's not able to see as deeply. But if you think about it, it's been a natural human, cross-cultural, not connected to religion, across continents. There are very clear indications that human beings have done very much the same things to grow, to change, to connect to something deeper. We can call it religion or spirituality, but beyond religion, human impulse of transformation, of opening. If you look around, they've done pilgrimages, holy books, saints, prayers, chants, and fasting. All different religions, they have rituals that include those things. And the idea of fasting for changing one's imprint of relationship karma, it's very, very interesting how deeply the emotional body is connected to food, right? Also, the emotional body needs food. It sometimes is the physical food, and sometimes it's experiences that the emotional body needs. Now, when we stop the unconscious patterns of eating, it creates almost like a little shock to the emotional body of, what? I'm not going to eat for a whole day. I have to fast. And it brings up things. It's said that, by fasting, we get more digestive energy. And sometimes emotions has to be digested. It's not uncommon that sometimes we feel a bit down and we have some food to, satisfy some emotional needs. Sometimes that's okay, but we can clearly see when emotions are going down and we emotional eat, then most likely we have to deal with those emotions on a different level, maybe the physical level. The idea of emotions and connection and relationship, and to use alchemy, fasting on specific days for specific planets, for specific teachings, that is, I think, a bridge that I'm very interested in seeing if modern Western scientific skeptical people like me, if they can actually test it as a technique, as a ritual. And I truly believe it's alchemy, because by fasting, we start to access the emotions, the energy in motions on a deeper level. And then we can say one's understanding has changed, and therefore one's karma will change as well.
Thank you. Yes, I think it's a beautiful way to say it, and it's a process of recognizing and becoming aware of those things that we need to work on. And like you said, like we go the same thing all over again and again, and recognizing where our weak points, what are our strengths. I remember personally when I did my chart, I remember the first time I didn't know anything about this, and the astrologer, he was from United States. He would tell me, I think it was, your Saturn is very low, like the number was very low, like you need to strengthen your Saturn, or, your moon. Anyways, he was like, Mondays, you need to do this. Fridays, you need to do that. Mondays, this specific chant. So he gave me a lot of different remedies, and the mantras were like a lot of mantras, but also like rituals. And But I also think it's beautiful for people that are not even so familiarized, because then they can start bringing forth some connection with the natural order of things and awareness of their own karmic experiences. And I think it just gives us a different scope, a different lens, to view our life, and what we've been given, and how we can work with that, right?
Yeah, it gives us that lens, and indeed, like, knowledge is power. And like, there's a saying that the fish will be the last one to recognize the water, because we're swimming in it. So we're swimming in this time and space, and every week we go through the same 7 days. And you mentioned that on specific days for specific rituals or observations. And many people, we learn the 7 days of the week from Sunday, Monday until Saturday, but do we actually question why we have 7 days and what they mean, and if there's maybe even a meaning behind them and the different energies? So Sunday, Moon Day, that's pretty obvious, but why is it in English Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday? We get to Saturday and we recognize, okay, so we have Saturn there. And indeed, we started with Sun and then Moon. But what is this Tuesday? What is Wednesday? What is Thursday? What is Friday? For Spanish or French, they might have, an easier access to understand what's behind those names. So Tuesday,
yeah,
right? In Spanish, how do you say Tuesday?
Martes.
Yeah, so it's pretty easy to recognize that that's Mars, isn't it? And
yes.
Tyr, in Norwegian we say tirsdag, Tyrsdag. There's a day of Tyr or Tyr. That's the god of war. And indeed, Mars is the god of war. We say martial art and martial law. Aries, Mars, that is a strong, fiery energy. So the idea of a moon day, Monday, and a Tuesday, they will have different energies. And then we go to Wednesday. In Spanish, it's
Miércoles.
Yeah, and that sounds very close to Mercury, right? So Mercury is Wednesday. That is Vodin or Odin. Onsdag, we say in Norwegian, that's for Odin. Again, Mercury and Wednesday go together. We can skip straight to, probably people recognize Thursday, Thor, right? The hero in today's action movies, Thor, the Viking god. I will say he's bit different in the old stories compared to, I believe it's Marvel superheroes. But anyway, in Spanish we get
Jueves.
Yeah, so Jupiter. Yeah, in fact, Jupiter and Jueves is the root to, I believe, jovial in English. It's a happy-go-lucky, very protecting energy of Jupiter. And of course, people know Friday is thank God it's Friday, is the date night, and Freya is...
And Freya.
Yeah, Frigga or Freya is the day for Friday. And in Spanish, it's easy. Which planet do you think it is?
Venus.
Venus. That is the day for Friday, of course. The day of love, Venus.
I was going to say that it's wonderful if we could all access this information, and then we could actually align with the days. Just as basic, we're not even talking about the calendar, but we're talking about every single day, like with the energy of that day, right?
Absolutely. So that is one in Indian calendar. That's 1 out of 5 different techniques. There are lunar days, there are solar lunar days, but just a simple 7 day of the week will have different qualities. And I actually believe that we are swimming in this. We align to it without knowing it, but to step up and consciously surf those energies so we don't get taken over by it. And the question from my teachers, I was like, why do certain cultures start their week on Sunday? Why do certain cultures start on Monday? Who decides this? Why should a week start on a certain day? And what will be the effect? What will be the effect? So he would say cultures that start on Sunday, and most modern cultures maybe start on Monday, but cultures that start on Sunday, well, they would align to the qualities of the sun, which is that life force, which is the true, anchor, the king in the solar system, or the CEOs. There's a there's a order that we can align to. So spirituality, illumination, knowledge, and these things are lifted up with the sun. Moon Day is a beautiful mother and caring, but when people go to work Monday through Friday, and it's having the blues of the Monday. So maybe their moon is not shining fully. They're having a difficult emotional day because it's back to Monday, it's back to the grind. And they go through the week, and thank God it's Friday. They get to have some fun on Friday night maybe, and then they rest maybe Saturdays, and it continues. One of my teachers, his tradition, they start their week on Thursday. Isn't that strange?
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's a day for knowledge. In Sanskrit, Jupiter is called Guru. So he belongs to a knowledge, a wisdom tradition. And to start the week on the day of Guru is every cycle, every 7 days, remembering we're starting, and it's about knowledge. It's about the tradition, it's about the lineage, it's about following the wisdom of Guru.
Thank you, Shivananda. I think definitely gives us insight, and right now that we're all in this situation also is that we're not all of us, but maybe some of us are not on the day-to-day, work 8 to 5 a concept of week that we normally have been, growing up with, and opens up like another perspective, just being from home and having a space or maybe time to just go on a daily basis with a bit more awareness of how we can connect with these energies. And of course, if we do the chart, it's even better because we understand then where are our weak points and strengths and how we can work on different dates, in different days and cycles as well. And I wanted to tap a little bit more on the cycles, because I do remember it's all mathematical and it's all like really calculated very precisely. But I remember that there is like a cycle understanding within Vedic astrology, and cycles that you change through your life, transitions that you have through life that mark important points in your personal life, changes. So can you speak more about the cycles and share with us a little bit of that, please?
Yeah. So specifically to one's individual chart, and also just even beyond individual chart, there is another cycle. Maybe I should speak about that first, because even if you don't know your chart, like you said, it can give a connection to know these 7 days. But there's also the lunar cycles. And old farmers or people who work by the sea, they know how powerful lunar cycles are. So even if you don't know your own chart, just taking time to connect to, wow, the moon is starting to move upwards, it's coming to a full expression. Wow, it's starting to go downwards, it's starting to go into emptiness, it's letting go of the light, it's coming to emptiness, and then it continues. And people who follow those cycles, they will start to see that there is a flow in nature. So even if you don't know your chart, you can start to follow lunar cycles, and I think very naturally, when is the time to start a new project? When is it time to lift something up? When is it time to fully shine? And when is it time to start to let go of something, maybe dissolving something and go completely into emptiness? Following the lunar cycles is absolutely a deep journey into oneself, one's emotions, one's spirituality, into nature. But even deeper, more precise, like you're saying, there's tremendous calculations. There is the individual chart. And in that chart, there is that fixed time-space moment. So based upon birth, down to even the seconds, there was a fixed crystallization of the chart, of one's karma. And it's always unique. It's like the iris, it's like the DNA, it's like the fingerprint. That unique time-space moment. You are coming into maybe there's another birth happening at the same time, maybe at the same hospital, but it will be separated by space. Or you can have twins, they will have the same space, but they will be separated by time. Maybe just 2, 3, 4, 5 minutes, or even less. That time separation is unique, and that creates a unique chart. It's the stamp we got on arrival, so to speak. We get that form and we carry that in this lifetime. But we carried it through different timelines. They're called dashas. So there's different dasha systems, but there are different calculations, and what they do is setting up different planetary cycles, and some are shorter, 6 years, 7 years, some are longer, 18, 19, 20 years, different cycles. And when I compare that to, it's almost like different roads that we travel upon, where, like I said, if the main chart is the character, is the hero in the journey, then in any epic saga there will be different books, different volumes, and in each volume there will be different chapters. And I will even say even each chapter will have different pages, but that's going into, predicting day to day. But what we can see is that knowing the main character and then knowing what that book is about, then we can start to plan ahead. No different than, we plan for a travel. We would look most likely up, what's the weather going to be like? Now, it's a prediction. We don't know exactly, but there are certain seasons that are quite strong, and we can predict, it's going to get colder in that season, it's going to be warmer, most likely it's going to rain more in that season. So looking at these cycles and seeing that for the next 5 years, next 20 years, you're running this cycle, or this is actually something that's very useful in relationship. People who've been together for maybe 10 years, and then we see that one person is going to enter a 6-year cycle. That's completely different. Wow, they're going to go through 6 years and they're going to, do very different things, act very differently. Things are going to come their way. And after 6 years, maybe they come back to a similar cycle. So, knowing that ahead of time can be saving a relationship, because the other person can give space, or they can know that, this person is in a new cycle, and most likely after 6 years they come back to a more normal or a different cycle. Sometimes just to learn about the past, because sometimes some people have grown up in maybe a long, bumpy, rocky cycle of what we call Rahu, the North Node, and they've been bumping along maybe their whole childhood and teenage years. They get conditioned, and they believe that life is like that life has that North Node, the Rahuvian energy, and suddenly they're changing into Jupiter, which is a completely different frequency. And maybe life has changed, but they're still sitting there bumping and thinking, believing that life is not to be trusted or something like that. So there are ways of both clarifying and resolving the past, and also starting to plan ahead. Astrology for me has not just been, mind-opening and interesting. I actually will say honestly, it has not just transformed my life, it has actually saved my life. I had chronic fatigue for many years and getting weaker and weaker, and seeing tons of, anything from modern medicine to alternative to spiritual. No one was able to diagnose me. I was falling down into a drain. And it got to a point where even getting up, taking a shower was a tremendous struggle. I had a cycle that I went through that really put me down into no physical strength at all. And it was months and months of research trying to figure it out, until I finally turned back into what I thought, okay, there's one thing I believe in, that's astrology. And then it clicked. So I'd known my chart for so long. I had seen it many times. I have it, in my head. But I picked it up again, and it was a deeper level that suddenly just clicked. And I actually self-diagnosed. It sounded the strangest, but I self-diagnosed. I even took steps to get the right treatment. And it was only afterwards that I actually got the lab results that proved my self-diagnosis was correct. I had a certain condition that had not been found. So that put me on a healing journey. It took me a couple of years to recover my strength. But I honestly will say that without that intuition and without the technical part, I don't think I would have recovered from it.
Thank you for sharing your experience. It helps a lot also to hear, from your personal experience, how this was helpful and useful for your personal growth and for your health. So sometimes we don't even know where something comes, from a lot of people. We're all searching healing in different ways, Reiki, reflexology, therapists, whatever that is. And I think this is another tool that allows us to discover ourselves in a much deeper way and find answers sometimes to things that we don't we don't really understand, why we behave in a certain way, why we have certain tendencies, why we have certain things. And thank you for sharing that, because I think it's beautiful to hear from your own experience how you were able to recognize and gave you light, in your personal life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, light. This is the science of light, and I believe that we have used stars for navigation since the beginning of dawn, the beginning of light, beginning of time. It said, Yat Pindeta Brahmande, in the smallest, so in the greatest, as above, so below. So this idea of looking out there, to actually look inwards, to find navigation internally and also in life, I believe that we still can look towards the stars for that.
Thank you. Yes, definitely a nice invitation for everybody. Thank you, Shivananda. And I'd like you to share a little bit of what you're doing. Personally taking your course right now, starting your Vedic astrology course. But I'd like for the others to listen of your offerings. I mean, you also do Ayurveda. I also had the honor to have you teaching during one of our trainings in Bali. Ayurveda and in Ayurvedic astrology, and you're teaching right now, and you teach philosophy, right? Yoga philosophy in the yoga barn. But can you share a little bit more of all the offerings that you have?
Yeah, I'm currently based in Ubud, Bali, and working through yoga barn. So I do see clients both in person there and also online. I focus mostly on the astrology, but my background was the way I got into astrology was through the Ayurveda. So I do teach that. I do mentor and guide people to learn deeper about the physical health of Ayurveda. The philosophy is a foundation. The understanding of, it's more than philosophy. A lot of times it's hard to translate these terms, but darshana. Darshan is a way of seeing. There are different lenses, different views, and classical Indian culture has 6 of them that belong in the Orthodox. There are many other views from Indian culture. Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism are maybe the 3 most common. But within Hinduism, there are many different traditions, and then there are 6 traditional views or philosophy. We guess we can somewhat use that term. So having a foundation in that gives much more deeper clarity if one is going to study Ayurveda, and definitely yoga as a spiritual pathway, more than just the physical, but the practice of the yoga is being in the world and using the physical body, using the mind, using the energy. And the map that's given is from Sankhya. That's one of the 6 darshanas. So I do teach this, the intellectual knowledge, astrology being the main passions. I do give individual consultations and mentorship, and also doing 3-month introduction programs that are online as well. I do want to say that my approach is maybe a bit more modern, and I have a Western background. So even though it's a very traditional, and I strive for having that connection, I do still question. I am, like I said, I'm a skeptical person. I want to test this out, and I want to bring it into modern context. Maybe it's also needed to bridge the old and the new, or the East and the West. So it's a constant work in development, and that passion of mine is to find how to make these teachings that are thousands of years old, how to make it relevant to this day and age, into modern context. And having said that, I don't think we have changed much. I don't think human nature and our foundation have actually changed that much, even though we have so much technology. I do believe that at the core we are still operating from the same principles. We have the same needs that are from ancient teachings.
Thank you. I think it's beautiful the work you're doing in bringing ancient and sacred knowledge to nowadays and applicable to our modern society. So thank you for that. And I love your classes. Super recommended to anybody who has the opportunity to attend them, and also your readings. So I will also be sharing your information here on the podcast so people can connect with you for that. Thank you. I don't know if there's anything else you would like to share about the topic with the listeners, anything that I missed out on asking that you consider is relevant to share right now?
I guess like when people ask me about learning astrology or what it is, for me it's always been about connecting to nature. It's a way, and I will actually say it's been a way for me to even develop trust in nature, trust in myself, who I am, trusting in larger nature. And I think that is something that is missing a lot in this day and age. We have so much information, we have access to the Vedas through a smartphone, right? But how much have we actually grown, and like the level of wisdom, compare that to knowledge, right? So there's a saying that wisdom is knowledge.
Huge difference.
Wisdom is knowledge applied. And then we have this idea of information. So there's so much information, so many different this and that. And even in Indian Jyotish Vedic astrology, it's a never ending. There are many different forms of Indian astrology. There's different schools, there's different tradition, there's different ways of making the chart. It becomes extremely complex. And I think to step back down into nature as we are here on earth, and to just start to observe nature, to observe the seasons, to start to look into lunar cycles. And we can use the smartphone, we can download an app that will show you the lunar cycles, that will show you where the sun is, and beautiful astronomy programs that you can download on your map, and you can start to look out into the sky, look out into the stars, and just learn that there are different constellations, different planets, just your own connection to the night sky. I think that is like the yogic pathway of direct experience, starting to step into nature and observing nature and observing lunar cycles. I think that is actually yogic alignment that is not just, off the mat. It's connecting the world to what is considered to be the mother moon and the father sun, these two different energies that are up there in the sky, and our connection to them, and seeing how they dance around in different seasons, different lunar cycles. Honestly, I don't think we need anything else but nature, the astrology, and all the math. Sometimes that is for particular people who have an interest in that stuff. But I do think we all are in relationship to Earth, the sun, and the moon. And the more we recognize that and connect to that, I think that helps us on our path.
Yes, thank you so much. Definitely. And it's an invitation for curiosity as well, right? Starting to, like, you mentioned a lot about questioning, I think it all starts with this inquiry, questioning and
absolutely
observing.
That is the most beautiful thing, that, to continue question. That's sometimes we might learn that there are 7 days of the week, but do we really question why there are 7 days? Well, now there are 7 days based upon the seven planets, but a curious mind will continue to ask why, right? A little child that's always asking why. The next question I want to ask to the listener is, why are the 7 days in that sequence? Have you ever thought about that? Why is there a sequence?
But I don't have the answers yet.
In astrology, there is a derivation for everything. So this is like learning the matrix of the universe and unraveling these patterns. Now we see that we have 7 days. I'm not going to go into it, but there is a reason why we actually have the order of a sun and a moon, and then into Mars and so forth. There is an order to that as well.
A beautiful invitation for that. Thank you. I'm very excited to continue the course with you to see if I could find the answer. Thank you, Shivananda.
My pleasure.
And it's been a pleasure to talk to you. I started this podcast to share insights on spirituality, spiritual teachings, and environmental awareness. So I always ask the participants what they think about concept of conscious living. How can we, by becoming conscious, help the collective? So I would love your perspective on that.
That's a great question. Conscious living. Consciousness. We are listening, we are sitting, we are breathing, we are aware of being aware. We have this self-reflecting quality of beingness. I am. So there's a type of frequency, I say, like that we can host, that we can hold, a type of being self-aware. And most of my teachers, they teach that as a foundation. So being in the body, doing the yoga and staying connected to the breath, that foundation of, hey, I'm alive, I'm in this body, wow, I'm experiencing these things, getting that anchor of one's self, of one's being, of one's consciousness into the body, and holding that, I think, is the foundation of this life. This is what we're born into. We have this vehicle of the physical body. So starting with oneself and starting with the body, starting with the breath, observing the mind, the energies, the emotions, and then extending that out into the environment, into the community, into the family. It's easy to meditate and develop spiritual knowledge in a cave and being, so connected to one's own spiritual life, but how consciously awake can we be in the family environment?
Totally.
Yeah, for me, the pathway of astrology is to extend that out even further, of being conscious of different time-space cycles. That is, like I said, it actually gives me a type of anchor and a security in life. So conscious living, that comes from the spiritual tradition, and they have beautiful teaching, Dharma, Artha, Kama, Moksha, the foundations of following one's path and consciously having the livelihood, the resources, and having healthy enjoyment and having spirituality. Those were foundational cornerstones. Consciously, in this day and age, I think the Balinese Hindu Agama tradition, they have a beautiful harmony teaching about Trihita Karana, the harmony between human to human, and and the community, and the family dynamic, and these things that maybe the Western individual lifestyle have a bit of problem with. Then the other one is harmony between human and nature. And then we have harmony between human, and we can call it the gods, or the higher principles, the higher forces of nature. So conscious living, to recognize that we are humans, we have a consciousness, we are part of this world, we are part of community, we're part of nature. In fact, we are nature. We are nature expressing. And to align to that, like I said, for me, the personal pathway is this astrology and cosmos. Cosmos is a beautiful term that actually means that there is order in the universe. It's not just chaos, there is actually a structure and an order, and aligning to that natural law, natural principles, natural order, dharma, and to consciously step on that path is what I consider to be conscious living.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that message. And my last question, given the current situation right now, I would love if you could share with us the most important message like you consider humanity needs to hear right now.
So where astrology can help us, that there was certain cycles that has been going on, especially 2019. It was bringing in a deeper and deeper, it's like pressing deeper and deeper down. And then there was an eclipse, December 26, 2019, that really made a turning point. It's almost like pressure that I was comparing it. I was telling people that it's almost like, can you imagine carbon being pressed and squeezed and squeezed and squeezed until it structurally changes? So maybe I was a bit, optimistic and naive. I thought it was going to be a structural change of darkness, of heavy, of this shadow of carbon, and ideally coming into a diamond shape. And then I said, and then it's changing and it goes forward, especially third week of January, it's moving forward. So that's based upon astrology and especially Saturn moving into a new sign and these things. But anyway, the current cycle we're in, what it did bring was very deep, dark shadow, and I didn't predict a virus. I didn't predict such a global event. And in retrospect, it's easier to see how deep and dark it actually was. But technically, we have moved out of it. We have seen this darkness. That's what I was saying, is that we will all get in touch with this very difficult darkness, shock, a trauma, fear is going to be really a big part of a release that's coming. So this cycle moved forward, and it's almost like what I said early 2019. I said to people, it's not easy. It's like this shadow has to be seen and recognized, and I thought it was going to be a bit more political and environmental, and it is environmental and it is political. I didn't predict the specifics of a virus. But what I told people, and I still say, is that we all have to get to work. We all have to roll up our sleeves and get going. Interesting enough, we're all shut down. I thought it was going to be more like we're going to have to go out into the world and take action. But we all are pushed inwards now. So it's almost like, okay, so we all got to roll up our sleeves and get to work on ourselves. We all have to clean up our homes, our own mind, our own emotions. We all have to look at ourselves very deeply. We're almost like, we're pushed into retreat and isolation, and we have to deal with ourselves and our routines and our habits and our patterns. So maybe that's the first level. Again, conscious living is about, we have a body, we have a mind, we have emotions. That seems to be what this current cycle has really, pretty hardcore pushed us into that role. I do believe it's starting to move. I do believe that in a few more months it's starting to release. There's been a few changes that is already removing some of the fear. I do believe it's slow and steady, and it might be seasonal. There might be some difficulty again end of the year, but regardless, we had a shock. We had a very, very powerful eclipse that took place at the end of December, and that was initiating the whole world into a trauma, into a shock. And sometimes we need a bit of shock to wake up. That's the downside of this, is that if we're not in alignment,
the balance of darkness and light.
Exactly. So if we're not fully prepared, or we don't have the sensitivity and this, there's a saying that it's better to align to nature before nature aligns us. So again, learning to surf those waves that are coming, instead of it being a tsunami that we're trying to fight against, we can learn to catch that wave and to trust it and to surf it. And I believe that wave was extremely powerful, but I do believe it's starting to slow down a bit. I do believe we all have individual lessons to learn. So I'm a bit reluctant to say there's this global awakening and this and that. I see a lot of beauty in people wanting to aspire to that, but at the same time, reality is pretty difficult this day and age. There is quite a bit of suffering in this world, and maybe this opportunity is to actually get in touch with that. As the Buddhist teaching is that the first noble truth is there is suffering, there is difficulty, there is shadow, there is darkness. And maybe this has been a wake-up call for many people to see that, the fragile nature of that a small unseen virus can cause so much difficulty, that the psychological impact, that the government, there is quite a lot of things that we have to clean up. And maybe we're forced to look at ourselves, our physical, our emotional, our psychological, our spiritual, and then our environment, starting with our own home, starting with our own family, and then ideally we extend that out into, again, I do believe the message for the next few years is that we have to roll up our sleeves and get to work. We have to start to take action, to be of service, to be in alignment to each other, to be in alignment with the world. And we all have a place to, we are all part of this. We all have a place, and to trust that we are, capable, that we have capacity, that we are here for a purpose. And again, I do believe introspection, connection to nature, finding one's own path is part of that. And my personal one is definitely astrology, but we all have individual paths and all a role to play in that.
Thank you. I think it's a great invitation for us to reconnect with our own personal gifts and passions and insight, and then, like you said it beautifully, and start sharing, that bhakti path of sharing and being in service to others. So thank you so much for that.
It can be as simple, all of that can be as simple as finding something that you love doing and just keep on doing it.
Exactly. Very good. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to speak with you and have this conversation with you. I'll be sharing all your details, and thank you again for your time, for your energy, and for the beautiful work you're doing and everywhere. So I'm delighted to have this conversation today with you. Thank you so much.
Absolutely, my pleasure to talk about this. It is my pleasure.
Thank you. I hope to return soon, and see you there back in Bali.
Yep.
And for the listeners, thank you so much for sharing, and I'll be posting more podcasts really soon. Thank you for your time. I hope you enjoy this conversation. Bye-bye.